You know, I've been slacking when it comes to developing my game recently, so I decided to finally bunker down and start working on it again. My game is called Pie Must Die. It's a game about a square traveling through the gauntlet of an evil ruler named Pi in order to defeat him and free the world from his tyranny. And I wanted to start recording the progress I've made a bit more. Development for this game has been going fairly slow, and that's because I'm writing in pure C without any game engine. Along with the fact that it's my first major project and that I've been balancing school on top of this, it's been taking a while for progress to come along. And most of my development is done in these weird month-long batches where I do nearly nothing but work in my game until I get bored and stop. I've been going through another one of these batches, and what better time to start a YouTube channel? So, the thing that started off this flurry of development was me finally fixing an age-old bug of mine. Essentially, I've had an issue for a while now where any kind of camera smoothing would cause an odd stuttering issue with my character. I've had this bug for years now, and I've finally fixed it. The problem is, I'm not really sure how. I believe the problem came from my smoothing logic being some confused version of the lerp function, where you have a certain start and end point and interpolate a point between those two, but in this case, we don't have any defined start and end point, since the start is the location of the camera and the end is the location of the player, and they're both constantly moving. It's this that I think was causing the stuttering. Not fully sure. I decided I just wanted to change the logic entirely. At the point when I made this change, I'd mostly given up and was just changing stuff randomly. I decided that instead of the camera following the player, it would be better if the camera looked ahead of the player based on their velocity. This worked pretty well without any kind of stuttering, but it was still kind of rigid looking. I then wanted to see if I could add smoothing to this, and it worked just fine, no stuttering. I'm pretty sure after seeing this I screamed, because legitimately this has been a problem for me for years. After that, I excitedly committed my change and started working on something else. Development tends to go like this a lot for me. I have a phase where I'm just adding a bunch of stuff and I ignore all those weird bugs and things that'll arise until it all catches up to me and I don't feel like working on it anymore. Seriously though, look at how smooth this is compared to before. After this, I fixed a second bug that's been annoying me for ages. Essentially, I made this really cool shader for an important recurring area using Voronoi noise, but it's still missing something. Basically, these weird circular stripes are supposed to be moving around. This is another thing that I've spent a significant amount of time trying to fix, and once I realized what the issue was, I was kind of embarrassed. Essentially, in OpenGL, if you want to pass variables to a shader, you need to use these things called uniforms, which you can map whatever you want onto. In this case, I needed to pass time so that these stripes could move with the passage of time. The thing I screwed up on is that you have to select the shader you're mapping the uniform onto with this command, and I was mapping the uniform before selecting the shader, so nothing would change. After fixing this, I was so happy with the results that I finally got around to adding a second shader to the wall, which is essentially the same thing, but it's a little dimmer and a little wider. There's two small problems with this at the moment though. First, for performance reason, my Voronoi noise implementation is separated into cells, and I don't fully remember how this works because quite frankly shaders are really insane and the math is rather involved, but because of the way I animate the points, there can be some visual artifacts where you can see the boundaries of each cell. Honestly though, I'm pretty content with this for now. Oh, and there's the second issue that this makes it kind of hard to see what's going on, which is arguably a problem with the shaders for the other level too. But honestly, it's worth it for the looks. It looks cool. I don't know. Now, at this point, it was mostly a lot of bug fixes and maintenance to make development easier, but I did have one little hiccup at some point. Sometime last year, I started to feel like my current system for creating entities was very inflexible and unwieldy. I'm writing this in C, so I didn't have any classes or any abstractions like that to make things easier, and polymorphism can be a daunting subject. It was at this point that I discovered a game dev server on Discord where plenty of people had experience making games without engines, and I decided to look through and see what people were doing there. It seemed common that people were using these things called entity component systems, and I decided to look into it a bit. I have actually heard of these before, specifically because Minecraft scripting API uses them, and from what I've heard, they make modding really easy. Of course, I'm not a Minecraft modder, so I'm not quite sure what context that came up in. But anyways, Essentially, ECS is a more data-oriented approach to game design, where you have entities, essentially just an ID, and you assign components and systems to them. For example, you could have a position component, which literally just holds the vector position of your entity, and you could have a velocity component, which again has your entity's velocity in vector form. Then you would just have a motion system, which has no job other than to add the value of the velocity component to the position component every iteration. And notably, ECS will iterate through a list of every component of the same type, rather than iterating through a list of every entity and operating on its component, which is why it's considered a more data-oriented approach. After deciding I definitely wanted to use an ECS, my next big dilemma was whether to make my own or to find another one to use. Plenty of people tend to make their own, but I decided that was not really something I was interested in, and it would just bring me more pain and a lot more suffering in the future trying to maintain the system. At this point, I decided to go with Flex, a fast and lightweight ECS written in C, which is my language. I do not regret this decision, and I decided to replace my enemies with this system, and it's been working great. It's allowed me to make several different types of enemies that can interact with the player very easily, or at least it did until I crashed out and deleted all of the new enemy types I created for some unrelated reason I can't remember. I do have a version control system which should have let me restore them, but sometimes I get sloppy and forget to commit my changes. Whoops. I'll add more enemy types to my to-do list for my next video. The new enemies also look more boring than the old ones because they're gray and they're missing their gyro in the center of their bodies. For lore reasons, I'm probably going to keep it like that, but maybe I can find some way to spice them up. The biggest thing on my to-do list here will be to replace everything with ECS. Right now, my friendly NPCs, bosses, and of course the player are still using the legacy character system. I have a feeling changing that will be another week of pain, so I've been rather hesitant. And that's pretty much all I want to include in this video. I mean, I made one other change, but it's long and I'm not going to get into it. Don't worry about it. I'll tell you about it in the next video, if I make a next video.